A pretrial hearing for Young Thug takes an unexpected turn when someone drops an X-rated video on the court screens. Legal analyst and civil rights attorney Joe Richardson discusses this bizarre moment and the details of this major racketeering case. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. There is a case out of Atlanta that is getting a lot of attention with some new, shall I say, unexpected developments. Rapper Young Thug and over 20 others have been criminally charged for their alleged roles in what prosecutors say is a street gang called Young Slime Life, or YSL. It's all part of an all-encompassing racketeering or RICO case. Now, the allegation being that Young Thug, whose real name is Jeffrey Williams, co-founded the gang, that he's kind of like the mafia boss, and that its members engaged in criminal activity since 2013, everything from drug trafficking to weapons possession to witness intimidation. Even some alleged members of the gang have been charged with attempted armed robbery and murder. Well, there are some things that have happened in pretrial hearings that we need to talk about. So let me bring in right now legal analyst and civil rights attorney Joe Richardson, who's a frequent contributor on the Law&Crime Network. Joe, always good to see you, and thanks for coming on Sidebar.
Likewise, my friend. Good to see you, Jesse.
I think you know where I'm going to start. I have to start with this because something happened in court. Something happened in court that you don't usually see, and maybe I'll say, thank goodness you don't usually see, because there was this pretrial hearing for Young Thug, and it was about evidence suppression, which we'll get into in a second, when all of a sudden a pornographic video popped up on all of the court screens. I believe this was happening during a Zoom session with other attorneys. Now, the court was experiencing technical difficulties earlier, but I don't think anyone expected a naked guy to pop up with a message that said "Free Young Thug." And despite quickly shutting it off, IT set up a new link. Someone seemingly had the original link and definitely took advantage of it. So, Joe, have you ever seen anything like that? Because that's not great.
Well, there's always a little bit of sensationalism with these trials that have to do with people that are popular. They have positions in popular culture, those types of things. So yeah, it was certainly interesting. It was unique in some ways, but is it something that would be totally, completely out of sorts? Heck, it might have been out of one of his videos. It could have been. Do you know what I mean? It's not so unusual that you would say, okay, this would never happen as it pertains to Young Thug. But the timing, somehow there's this Zoom bomb while the lawyers are trying to make some presentation. Yeah, of course, that's interesting, and in a lot of ways. But hey, this is the world that we live in, and with technology, sometimes it goes down, and people have a way to make a point. Free Young Thug with nothing on. Okay, here we go.
Well, their faces watching them, and there's no audio during it. You just see their faces. I think in and of that of itself was incredibly entertaining. And by the way, a jury didn't see this. There's really no jury yet. This trial for Young Thug and I think 25 other of his co-defendants is set for January 9th, 2023. So it's not like a jury saw this, which would be a whole other mess. But let's talk about what happened in the hearing, because this is important. During the hearing, prosecutors wanted to use some key evidence that was obtained by police during a 2015 search. And the judge ultimately said that the evidence from his cell phone and what else was taken during that seizure can't be used now. That's a big blow to prosecutors. Why did the judge rule that way?
My understanding is that it got ruled that way. It was about the tent in the window, right? And the problem with the tent in the window. Okay, I'm not supposed to have a tent in the window, but that also means the officer's not supposed to see. He couldn't provide evidence of how the tent broke state law. And so therefore, if you're going down that road, now the evidence that's collected during the stop is suddenly not allowed, because if you weren't supposed to stop him, you weren't supposed to, because there was no violation related to the tent, then that means that what you get, you're not supposed to have, and you can't use an evidence.
So, Joe, during that hearing, it was a big win for Young Thug, because apparently there was this raid on his home in 2015 and different items were seized, including his cell phone. But the judge ruled that that evidence now cannot be used at trial. Why is that the case?
Basically, there was a big problem because with the validity of the warrants, or even if the warrants actually existed. Sometimes police get a little overzealous, and they say, we'll fix it, later. And but when it has to do with constitutional rights, and you didn't check the boxes where your warrants were valid in the first instance, or if they didn't exist at all, and so now all these years later he gets thrown out. But apparently they got a lot of information from those warrants. Through the cell phones, the information that they got, et cetera. So that's going to be interesting to see how it affects the case.
And that can make or break a case. I mean, look what happened to Robert Kraft when they couldn't use the evidence of what happened at that spa. That case fell apart. So I'm not saying the same thing will happen here, but generally speaking, RICO cases, we saw it a lot with organized crime and mafia figures. RICO cases, how tough is it for prosecutors to prove that? Because Young Thug's attorneys are saying that YSL is young stoner life. It's not a gang, that he didn't do anything wrong. He's not the head of this criminal organization. How tough are RICO cases to prove against him and the other members of this alleged gang?
To be honest with you, they're not the toughest cases to prove. These were created because RICO was created in the first instance because it was hard getting the mafia for anything other than income tax evasion. So they could throw a bunch of stuff in a box together, some of which were outdated and couldn't be prosecuted as individual crimes, and allege a criminal enterprise. And then now you get him and now you get everyone. Interestingly, this is different than R. Kelly. R. Kelly, they use RICO to get him only and not everybody else. In this case, they've switched this over to rappers. This has happened with musicians and other people, and they're getting 26, 27 people, however many people that is. So it's not as tough as it could be, but because you get to allege an enterprise, but you still need the evidence that you need. And so going back to that seizure and that undoing of some of that evidence, that's going to be a thorn in their path for sure.
Yeah, the conspiracy to violate the RICO statute is really tough. I guess just generally speaking, this is an interesting public policy, right? So the Fannie Willis, who brought this case, this is really going after high profile people. And it seemed that, her stance is if you commit crimes, we are going after you. No one's above the law. I'm not even going to get into, the investigation into former President Donald Trump, but that's happening under her jurisdiction as well. So it just becomes a situation where, I think there's a lot of eyeballs on this case because you're having high profile members of the rap community being charged here. But it also brings up this other issue because rap lyrics are being used as evidence here. And so I think a lot of people have eyes on this case about, is this demonizing rappers? Is this suggesting that this is that they're all criminals by what this indictment means? How do you view it? And how do you view also the use of rap lyrics as evidence?
I think that that's a very difficult proposition. First of all, even though rap has taken hip hop may have taken it to another level, this is not the first. This is not the first time that lyrics that talk about things that are negative, including things that are against the law, etc., have been, espoused by artists, right? And so, the same thing that'll make you laugh will make you cry. You call yourself Young Thug, you call your label something that suggests violence and things like that. Now you become a target, and then they can use their words against you. I'm not a big advocate of using the words against them to prove that something happened, but they are using the words, and it's dangerous for artists and something that they've got to look at. See, if they had a different image, maybe they wouldn't be stars, but they certainly wouldn't be getting prosecuted. Okay, and so I think it's a problem that they're using the lyrics because the lyrics don't prove anything. But still, in a world where someone would look to get a high profile conviction, a whole bunch of people all at once, and people get elected based on prosecutions often because it gives a perception that you're safer. They have to be really careful about that.
And by the way, Jay-Z and other musicians have come forward and trying to pass legislation. I think in New York, it's called the rap music on trial. They basically want to limit the use of lyrics in criminal trials for very similar reasons. I want to talk about Gunna for a second, whose real name is Sergio Kitchens, because Gunna did something very interesting. He took an Alford plea. He took this plea deal. His 5-year sentence was commuted. There's some conditions now, but he's being released from jail. He has to do about 500 hours of community service. An Alford plea is very interesting, right? Because he's basically suggesting, I'm going to plead guilty, but I'm not admitting I did anything. I'm not admitting to any of the crimes. I think he can be compelled to testify, but he can invoke his Fifth Amendment right, which begs the question, why was this deal offered to him?
My sense is that he's a small player. He's got one charge. I forget it. I think it's one racketeering charge, but he's not the big fish here, right? He's done about a year. They could see themselves clearing the table, moving him off to the side. He can be forced to testify. It won't necessarily help them because he would invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege. But now what he's got to do is he's got to make sure the street knows that he didn't snitch. He released a statement saying, "Hey, I didn't cooperate. I'm not cooperating." But he still thought to himself, like, I can go all the way down with this thing, or I can jump ship now doing what I have to do. And that's the decision that he made.
See, the thing that I look at it as, maybe the case against him was weak. And that's the part that I'm very curious about to see what happens next month. If any of the parts of the case are weak against any of the multiple defendants, does it blow up the whole case? Because if something wasn't really tying him, maybe they said, you know what, he's the weakest element. It could break up the whole chain. Maybe they have to reevaluate the other defendants.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's true. They're very close to the eve of trial here, and they may make some decisions to say, does this person's story complicate our path? It's like, we're on our way from point A to point B, but we've got to take a detour to get this guy. But the goal is point B. The goal is Young Thug, and the folks that are around him the most and that have multiple charges. So they probably just decided to clear the table and thereby make their case stronger.
All right. Well, listen, I mean, this trial is going to be very interesting to follow. Hopefully there are no more naked men appearing on Zoom. But who knows? Who knows what to expect? Joe Richardson, thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate it as always.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
And that's all we have for you, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here on Sidebar. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.